Susan Carter's hands trembled as she tucked a grainy ultrasound photo into her purse, the black-and-white image of her unborn son blurring through a sting of tears. The office around her buzzed with the hum of printers and muted chatter, but the sound felt distant, drowned by the echo of Richard Winston's voice still ringing in her ears. "You know this company isn't the right fit for your situation, don't you?" he'd said, his broad shoulders shrugging as if her 5 years at Winston Corp meant nothing. She stood frozen in the doorway of his sleek corner office, her 34-year-old frame dwarfed by the weight of his casual dismissal, her swollen belly a quiet defiance he refused to see. The Philadelphia high-rise gleamed under a gray March sky, its glass walls a monument to ambition Susan had poured herself into. She'd been a star analyst 5 years of late nights, flawless reports, campaigns that pulled millions in revenue. At 7 months pregnant, she'd kept the pace, juggling deadlines with doctor visits, proving she could handle it all. Winston Corp marketed itself as progressive shiny ads, diversity pledges, but Susan had felt the shift since her announcement. Sidelong glances, clipped replies, her ideas brushed off in meetings. She'd clung to one truth: hard work trumped everything. Until today. It happened fast. She'd walked into the boardroom that morning, expecting a routine briefing. Instead, Richard, 52, all sharp suits and sharper edges, sat flanked by HR drones, his face a mask of indifference. "Susan, we're letting you go," he said. No preamble, no apology. Business decision. Her breath caught, the room tilting. "Why?" she'd asked, voice steady despite the panic clawing her chest. Richard's lips twitched, a half smirk. "You've been great, but priorities shift." His eyes flicked to her stomach, the unspoken truth hanging heavy. No warning, no severance, just a pink slip slid across the table. She'd packed her desk in a day's pens, files. A mug her team had gifted her after a big win, every item a shard of a life she'd built. Colleagues avoided her gaze, their silence louder than words. Linda Brooks, her closest friend in the office, lingered nearby, 38 and sharp-eyed, her whisper urgent as Susan zipped her bag. "This isn't right, Sue. Something's off, file dig." Susan nodded, too numb to reply, her hand brushing the ultrasound photo again. She told herself she'd fight later after the shock wore off, after she could breathe. Richard's voice followed her out, a parting shot as she reached the elevator. "Best of luck, Susan. Take care of that little one." The doors closed, cutting off his smug tone, but not the sting. 5 years loyalty, awards, late nights saying they dumped her like trash, all because she dared to be pregnant. She stepped into the lobby, the city's chill biting through her coat, her mind racing. She had no savings to stretch, no plan for a baby due in weeks. Fear not how would she survive, but beneath it, something hotter flickered. She'd heard whispers, meetings she wasn't invited to, Richard's offhand cost-cutting remarks. Linda's warning echoed. Something's off. Susan's hand tightened on her purse, the ultrasound a lifeline. She'd walked in today, a worker bee. She'd left the cast off. But she knew something Richard didn't, a secret tucked away, a spark he'd lit without realizing. She'd kept recordings, snippets of his voice from months back, casual cruelties he thought no one tracked. The street stretched before her, cars honking in the dusk, and Susan straightened, her jaw setting. Why they really fire her aunt so fast? She didn't have answers yet, but she'd find them. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Rain streaked the windows of a cramped Philly apartment, the patter a dull rhythm against the silence inside, where a cardboard box sat unopened on a kitchen counterpins, a mug, remnants of a life upended. The city outside churned on, oblivious to the woman pacing the linoleum floor, her 7-month belly a quiet weight beneath her sweater. It had been 3 days since Winston Corp cut her loose, 3 days of phone calls to recruiters, polite rejections piling up like bricks. "We're not hiring right now," they'd say, or worse, a hesitant pause followed by, "Given your circumstances, maybe wait a bit." Her savings wouldn't stretch past rent, and the baby was coming fast. The phone buzzed, a lifeline piercing the haze. Linda Brooks' voice crackled through, low and urgent. "Susan, I heard something you need to know. Susan stopped pacing, her 34-year-old frame tensing as Linda spilled it. I snuck into a meeting Richard and HR, closed-door stuff. They planned this, Sue, weeks ago, so they couldn't carry dead weight their words, not mine. Susan's breath caught, the words slicing deeper than Richard's smirk. Dead weight? She whispered, hand resting on her stomach. Linda's tone hardened. Yeah, you're not the first anyone costly gets the axe. I'm digging more, but watch your back. That was the spark confirmation of a betrayal Susan had half-sensed but couldn't face. Winston Corp wasn't just cold, it was calculated. Richard Winston, 52 and steely, hadn't fired her on a whim that targeted her, her pregnancy a line item to erase. She sank into a chair, the ultrasound photo from her purse staring back from the table. 5 years of loyalty reports that saved millions, campaigns that won awards, and they'd marked her expendable the moment she'd told them about the baby. The whisper she'd ignored Richard's cost-cutting quips, the way he'd skipped her in meetings snapped into focus. She tried anyway, sent resumes, made calls, each no a punch to her dwindling hope. One recruiter was blunt. Words out Winston's saying you underperformed. Tough sell with a kid on the way. Susan's jaw tightened. Underperformed? She'd been their star, carried teams while hiding morning sickness. Now, Richard's lie was blacklisting her, a smear she couldn't scrub. Fear clawed her son, needed diapers, formula. A roof and anger simmered beneath it. She wasn't just a number. She was a mother, a fighter, and they'd underestimated her. Then it hit Linda's words, a memory clicking into place. Months back, Susan had started recording meetings not for this, but for notes, her phone tucked in her bag, catching every word. Richard's voice, casual and cruel, floated up from those files. We need to trim the fat pregnant ones, old ones, they drag us down. Another clip, weeks later. Carter's due soon cut her before the leave kicks in. Her hands shook as she played them back. The proof, raw and damning. She'd kept them, forgotten them, a habit from juggling too much. Now, they were her weapon. Linda called again that night, her voice a whisper over the line. Found my emails, Sue. They're burying it, but James Miller's the puppet master. HR guy cold as ice. He's pushing Richard to streamline. I'll get what I can. Susan nodded, though Linda couldn't see. James 48, all numbers and no soul in HR like a machine, slashing costs without blinking. She'd met him once, his handshake limp, his eyes skipping over her like she didn't exist. He planned this, and Richard had signed off, laughing as she walked out. The tension climbed with every hour. Susan dug through her laptop, pulling files, performance reviews glowing with praise, emails thanking her for late nights, proof she'd been gold until her belly showed. She synced the recordings, her secret growing sharper hours of Richard and James plotting, their voices a noose they didn't know they'd tied. Linda's text trickled in snippets of memos, names of others they'd cut. Susan's apartment became a war room, papers spread across the table, her resolve hardening. She wasn't just fighting for herself, now every dead weight, they'd axe deserved this too. Back at Winston Corp, Richard strutted through his days, oblivious to the storm brewing. He bragged in a staff huddle. Linda overheard, Carter's gone, clean slate, back to business. James nodded beside him, his thin lips twitching, both smug in their fortress of glass and lies. They thought Susan was finished broke, pregnant, out of moves. But she was out there, piecing it together, her recordings a ticking bomb they couldn't hear. She'd walked away once, head down, purse in hand. Now, she was building something they'd never see coming. Hey, what do you think of this kind of unfairness? Susan imagined asking, her voice steady despite the chaos inside. Ever face something like it? Drop it in the comments side, love to hear. Like and subscribe if you're with Med. His is just the start. She leaned back, rain tapping the window, her hand on her belly. What would she do with those recordings? Let them sit, or light the fuse? She didn't know yet, but the choice was hers, and it was coming fast. The fluorescent lights of a small law office buzzed overhead, casting stark shadows across a cluttered desk piled with files and coffee cups, a stark contrast to the polished gleam of Winston Corp's tower across town. Outside, Philadelphia's April rain had eased to a drizzle, but inside, the air crackled with something electric hope, fury, a reckoning taking shape. A woman sat hunched over a laptop, her 7-month belly pressing against the chair's edge, her 34-year-old hands steady as they clicked through audio files. Each clip Richard Winston's voice. James Miller's cold calculations built a case she'd never meant to make, until now. She'd found a lawyer through Linda Brooksmark Hensley, 42, a labor rights bulldog with a reputation for taking down giants. He leaned back in a chair across from her, his tie loose, listening as the recordings played. Trim the fat Carters due soon. Cut her before the leave. His eyes widened, a sharp inhale breaking his calm. "Susan," he said, voice low with shock, "this isn't just wrong, it's illegal as hell. They violated federal labor laws, Title VII, the works. You got a slam dunk case here." He tapped the desk. "Urgent now. We can sue big. You in?" That was the break the moment the tide turned. Susan Carter stared at the ultrasound photo pinned to her bag, her son's tiny form a silent push. She'd spent weeks reeling fired without warning, blacklisted, her savings draining as rejection piled up. Winston Corp had bet on her breaking, on her disappearing quietly into motherhood. Mark's words flipped. They weren't untouchable. They were vulnerable, and she held the proof. Her hands clenched, the weight of Richard's smirk business decision and James's cost-cutting schemes fueling a fire she'd tamped down too long. Her mind churned, diving into the past. 5 years at Winston Corp nights she'd worked through nausea, campaigns she'd saved while hiding cramps, all to prove she belonged. She'd ignored the signs Richard skipping her ideas. James's clipped, "We'll handle it," when she asked about leave. She told herself it was stress, not bias, that hard work would win. But the recording shattered that lie. Her pregnancy wasn't a flaw. It was their excuse. She doubted herself, feared fighting would tank her career forever. Now, staring at her son's image, she saw it clear. This wasn't just her fight, it was for every woman they'd dismissed, every voice they'd silenced. "I'm in," she said, her voice firm, a decision snapping into place. Mark grinned, pulling a legal pad. "Good. We got discrimination, wrongful termination, those tapes are gold. I'll file tomorrow class action if we find more victims." "Winston's done." Susan nodded, her chest loosening for the first time in weeks. She'd hesitated. Lawsuits meant exposure, risk, a spotlight she'd never wanted. But the alternative was worse, letting Richard and James win, letting her son grow up in a world where this was okay. She chose war, not retreat. Her secret now, a weapon aimed at their throats. The shift was seismic. Mark mapped it out: subpoenas, depositions, a public filing that had hit like a bomb. Susan handed over everything: recordings, Linda's memos, her own glowing reviews clashing with the deadweight label. She'd been meticulous, a habit from years of analysis, and now it paid off. Linda called that night, her voice a mix of awe and nerves. "Sue, I got more. James emailed Richard last month, said she's a liability, move fast. They're screwed if this leaks." Susan's pulse raced. "It's leaking. I'm suing." Linda hooped, a rare crack in her cool. "Givi, inhale." Back at Winston Corp, Richard strutted through a board meeting, oblivious, his 52-year-old swagger intact. Carter's history smooth sailing now, he'd said, James nodding beside him, his 48-year-old frame rigid with approval. They thought they dodged a bullet, thought Susan was too broken to fight. The tower hummed around them, campaigns rolling, profits ticking up, their fortress unbreached. But across town, Susan and Mark were loading the cannon, her recordings a fuse they couldn't see. She'd walked out their doors and nobody. She'd walked back in their nightmare. Susan sat back, the lawyer's office quiet now, Mark scribbling notes. She'd been a cog, then a cast-off. No, she was a force. The doubt lingered: could she win, or would they crush her again? But her son's heartbeat, faint in that ultrasound, drowned it out. She'd fight for him, for herself, for the others they'd discarded. The drama was cresting, Winston Corp's glass walls about to shatter. How would Richard and James react when the lawsuit hit? Susan didn't know, but they'd feel it soon and hard. The courtroom doors swung shut with a heavy thud, sealing the buzz of reporters and the sharp click of heels into a muffled echo, leaving only the hum of tension inside. Philadelphia's spring sun streamed through high windows, glinting off polished wood, but the air felt thick charged with a storm that had been brewing since a pregnant woman walked away from Winston Corp with a secret in her purse. Now, weeks later, that secret had landed like a grenade, subpoenas served, recordings filed, a class action suit slamming the firm with charges of discrimination and wrongful termination. The tower's glass walls were trembling, and the men inside were scrambling. Richard Winston stood at the defense table, his 52-year-old frame rigid in a tailored suit, his jaw tight, as Mark Hensley laid out the case. Winston Corp targeted Susan Carter. Mark said, voice booming, fired her without cause, citing her pregnancy as dead weight, their words, caught on tape. He played the clips, Richard's drawl, James Miller's cold assent, each word a hammer blow. The judge's brow furrowed, the gallery gasped, and Richard's fists clenched. Lies, he barked, his lawyer shushing him fast. James, 48 and pale beside him, stared at the floor, his HR empire cracking under the weight of his own voice. That was the crisis their fortress breached, denial their only shield. The board huddled in a side room, their whispers frantic, stocks dipping, clients balking, the press circling. We didn't authorize this, one hissed, glaring at Richard. You said it was clean. Richard's face flushed, his control slipping. It was Carter's blowing it up, faking it. But the tapes weren't fake, and the room knew it. Susan sat across the aisle, 7 months pregnant, her 34-year-old frame steady despite the stakes. She'd unleashed this, her recordings a twist they'd never seen coming. And now Winston Corp was bleeding publicly, painfully. The dark turn hit mid-trial. Richard's lawyer, a slick suit named Grayson, leaned across a mediation table, his voice smooth. Susan, we'll settle $200,000, hush money, walk away. No one wants this mess dragging on. The offer hung there, a lifeline dangling over a cliff. Mark shot her a look, her call. Susan's hand rested on her belly, her son's kicks a quiet pulse. $200,000 could buy diapers, rent, a fresh start, security she'd lost when Richard smirked her out the door. But it'd mean silence, letting them slink away, letting others fall to the same axe. Her chest tightened, safety or justice, a choice she'd never wanted to make. She stared at the ultrasound photo in her bag, her mind flashing to Linda Brooks' warning. They've done it before. To the women who'd vanished from Winston Corp quiet exits, no fuss, no fight. To her own nights, sobbing over bills, blacklisted by Richard's lies. No, she said, voice cutting through the room's hush. I'm not settling. This goes public, all of it. Grayson blinked, stunned. Richard's face purpled, a vein throbbing. Mark grinned, slamming his briefcase shut. See you in court, then. The plan ignited. Susan handed the recordings to a local news outlet that night, Linda slipping her the final piece. An email chain, James to Richard, cut her now, save the leave cost. By morning, it was everywhere. Winston Corp caught in pregnancy bias scandal, headlines screaming, TV anchors dissecting, social media exploding. Protesters hit the tower steps, signs waving. Fair work, fair pay. Clients pulled contracts, big ones. Millions in losses, stocks tanking as the board scrambled. Richard stormed his office, hurling a chair. James locked his door, his cold pragmatism melting into panic. Susan watched it unfold from Mark's office, the TV flickering with her story. They're done, Linda said over the phone, voice triumphant. Board's meeting now, heads will roll. Susan nodded, her resolve stealing. She'd walked away broken, a cast-off at 7 months, but now she'd flipped the game. The Thapasher secret, her shield had torn through Winston Corp's lies, exposing rot they couldn't bury. Mark paced beside her, mapping next steps, depositions, more plaintiffs stepping up, a reckoning bigger than she dreamed. Richard's empire was crumbling, but he wouldn't go quiet. She'll pay for this, he'd snarled to James, plotting countersuits, smears, anything to claw back power. James nodded, hollow-eyed, his numbers game a bust. They'd underestimated her, thought her pregnancy made her weak, thought she'd fold. Now, their tower shook, the press banged, the board turning. Susan had pushed them to the edge, but the fall wasn't complete not yet. She'd refused the money, chosen the fight, and the stakes were sky-high millions, reputations, a legacy for her son. The courtroom loomed again, the next round ticking closer. Susan stood firm, her hand on her belly, the ultrasound a talisman. She'd lost everything: job, stability, but gained something fiercer. A voice, a cause, a shot at justice. Winston Corp was reeling, but what would they lose when the gavel fell? She didn't know, but the answer was rushing in and it'd be loud. The gavel fell like a thunderclap in the Philadelphia courtroom, its echo cutting through the hum of whispers and the rustle of papers, a sound that sealed a verdict months in the making. Outside, summer sun baked the steps where protesters had once waved signs, but now the crowd was reporters, their cameras flashing as Winston Corp's glass tower loomed in the distancia, giant humbled, its cracks exposed. Inside, the judge's voice rang clear. Winston Corporation is ordered to pay Susan Carter $3 million in damages and implement immediate policy reforms. The gallery erupted cheers, gasps a wave of noise that drowned the last of Richard Winston's empire. Relief washed over the woman at the plaintiff's table, her 8-month belly a quiet triumph beneath her blouse. Susan Carter, 34, exhaled, her hand brushing the ultrasound photo she'd carried like armor. She'd found strength she didn't know she had, weeks of doubt. Nights replaying Richard's smirk turned into this, a win not just for her, but for every worker they'd discarded. Mark Hensley clapped her shoulder, his grin wide. "You did it, Susan." Theory cooked. She nodded, steady now, the fear that had gripped her since that pink slip replaced by something fire Sarasolve, earned hard. The final stand came hours later, in a deposition room thick with tension. Richard Winston slumped across from her, his 52-year-old frame deflated, his suit wrinkled, no trace of the smug director who'd laughed her out. Fired by the board last week, replaced by a new CEO, promising transparency. He was a shell, his empire's millions bleeding out in fines and lost contracts. "You ruined me," he muttered, voice hoarse, eyes locked on the table. Susan met his gaze, calm, unyielding. "You ruined yourself," she said, sliding a policy draft across mandatory leave, pregnancy protections, reforms he'd never have signed. "This is what matters now." He didn't touch it, just stared, a man who'd lost everything to his own game. That was the peak justice delivered, Richard broken, Susan rising. The courtroom win wasn't the end, it was the spark. Winston Corp's new brass rolled out, changes fast, a public apology, diversity hires, a fund for fired workers scrambling to save what scraps remained. James Miller, the cold HR puppeteer, resigned quietly, his 48-year-old career torched by the scandal he'd fueled. The press ate it up, pregnant analyst topples corporate giant, Susan's face on every screen, her recordings the soundtrack to their fall. She hadn't just won, she'd rewritten the rules. A year later, she stood on a conference stage, her son 8 months old, chubby and giggling cradled in her arms. The auditorium buzzed, packed with workers, advocates, even Linda Brooks beaming from the front row. "I was fired for being a mother," Susan said into the mic, her voice steady. "But I fought for every mother after me." Applause roared, a wave that lifted her higher than Winston's tower ever had. She'd taken the settlement, $3 million, a lifeline for her boy, and turned it into more, a role as a labor rights advocate, speaking out, pushing laws, ensuring no one else faced that boardroom axe. The old office loomed in her mind as she stepped off stage, its glass walls now a memory. She'd walked past it once, months back, new signs, new faces, a plaque touting equity where Richard's name once hung. Linda had stayed, promoted now, her text a lifeline through the fight. "You changed it, Sue," she'd said, and Susan felt it standing there, her son's weight warm against her. She'd flipped a world that had tried to crush her. From a cast-off at 7 months to a voice no one could silence. She'd won more than money, she'd won power for herself and others. Richard fattied a footnote. His house sold. His name mud. Winston Corp limped on, scar but alive. Its reform's a testament to Susan's fire. She'd started with a secret those recordings, a fluke of habit, and turned it into a legacy. Justice isn't one fight, she told the crowd. It's a promise we keep. The ultrasound, once her anchor, now sat framed at home, a reminder of why she'd stood up when they'd bet on her falling. Thanks for riding this out with me, she imagined saying, picturing faces beyond the stage. Means a lot you're here. Ever seen unfairness hit close or fought back? Drop it in the comments. I am all ears. If this moved you, hit that like button, subscribe for more. Next story's gonna shake you. Click over and check it out. See you soon. She kissed her son's head, the crowd's echo fading, her steps light. Winston's laugh was dust. Her voice carried on.